Alright, so let's get right to it. So, based on the notes from the other evening, we took the word problem and we set up the three equations. We also set up the matrix. Now we're going to go ahead and dive into what's called the Gaussian Elimination Method. So I hope you guys are paying attention and take good notes. So let's take a look at how to solve using the Gaussian Elimination Method. So here's our matrix. There are three row operations that you can perform. So the first row operation that we're going to look at here is multiplying or dividing a row by a number. So what are rows? These are rows. So we got one row across, two rows, three rows. Okay, columns are up and down. Okay, the next thing that you can do is you can switch rows. So if we wanted to switch row 1 and row 2, we could switch these two rows around. And the third thing that you can do with rows is you can add and subtract rows. And then finally, you can do any combination. So you may multiply a row by a number and then add it to another row. So those are your row operations. Now the goal here is to go from this matrix to the identity matrix. This is very important. What we want to end up with here is we want to end up with a 1 going diagonally through the matrix, and then zeros below the ones, and then zeros above the ones. And then here our answers would be found. So let me explain what each one represents. So when you're in the first column of numbers is going to represent, in this case, looking back at our system, it's going to represent the small, how many small cups, how many small sodas were sold. Okay, the second column, the 1 in the second column is going to represent the medium cups. How many medium cups were sold? And then finally the third column is going to be large. So the number over here will tell you how many. So small, S equals, and then the number of small cups. The second one in the second column is medium, so that will give you the number of medium cups. So the solutions are over here. The ones tell you what variable is solved: small, medium, large. Okay, let's get into it. So right off the bat, the first thing we want to get is we want to first get the 1 in the upper left-hand corner. And we have that. So great. Nothing we have to do with that. The second thing we want to do is we want to get the zeros here in the first column. Work on these two zeros. So to do that, one of the ways we could do that is we could take row 1 minus row 2. 1 minus 1 is 0. So since this is the row I want to change, I do not want to change this row. We got a 1 here. So we would write row 1. This is the row I want to change. So this is where I'm going to write the row operation. I'm going to take row 1 and subtract row 2. Because 1 minus 1 is going to give us the 0. So remember, you have to use critical thinking. You have to think about how you're going to get these numbers. And so when you subtract row 1 minus row 2, this is going to yield, that's what this arrow means. This arrow means to yield a new row 2. This is the row that we're changing. We're not changing row 1 right now. We're only changing row 2. So let's do the math. Okay? 1 minus 1. That's going to give us 0. So remember, row 1 is not changing. 1 minus 1.25 is negative 0.25, or negative 1/4. 1 minus 1.4, negative 0.4. 23 minus 28.45. And yes, I did use a calculator to come up with these numbers, which you will be allowed to do as well. All right, we got our 0 here. Next, how are we going to get our 0 here? Bottom left. So one of the ways we could do this is we could multiply row 1 by 12 and subtract row 3, because 12 times 1 is 12, minus 12 is 0. So we're going to multiply row 1 by 12, and subtract row 3, and that's going to yield a new row 3. So again, row 1 is not changing, it's row 3 that's changing. So 12 times 1 is 12, minus 12 is 0. 12 times 1 is 12, minus 16 is negative 4. 12 times 1 is 12, minus 20 is negative 8. 12 times 23 is some number, minus 376 is negative 100. Well, look at there. We've got our first column. Yay! We're 1/3 of the way there. All right. Next, we want to get the second one. So to get the second one, it's fairly easy to do. In order to get a 1 in this position, you would just divide this row by this number. Anything divided by itself is 1. So we're going to take row 2, that's this row right here, and we're going to divide it by negative 0.25. So let's find out what our new row 2 is going to be. So 0 divided by that is 0. That divided by itself is 1. And dividing again, we get this negative 0.4 divided by negative 0.25 is going to give us 1.6. And then negative 5.45 divided by negative 0.25 is going to give us 21.8. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite row 1 and row 3. All right, so now that I have my 1 here, I need to get my 0 on the top and on the bottom. Now with getting the zeros here, we did use some subtraction here, but I would not necessarily do that when you're trying to get the zeros here and here, because we don't want to mess up our first column. Okay? And watch what happens. If I subtract these two rows, yeah, 1 minus 1 is 0. But if I do that here, 0 minus 1 is negative 1, and it messes up our 1. So what you want to do here is we want to multiply this row by negative 1 and add it to positive 1. Again, multiply this row by negative 1 and add it to this row, which will give us 0. Negative 1 plus 1 is 0. Now see what happens here. If I multiply 0 by negative 1, we get 0 plus 1 is 1. So we're going to take row 2, multiply it by negative 1, add it to row 1, and we get a new row 1. So, negative 1 times 0 is 0, plus 1 is 1. Good. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1, plus 1 is 0. Negative 1 times 1.6 plus 1 is negative 0.6. Negative 1 times 21.8 plus 23 is 1.2. Now, we don't want to change row 2. Right now, it's good. Okay, now we need to get a 0 in the spot below. So now, we look at negative 4 and we think, well, what would we add to negative 4 to make 0? Positive 4. So we would multiply row 2 by positive 4. So 4 times row 2 plus row 3 yields a new row 3. So let's do the math. So 4 times 0 is 0, plus 0 is 0. 4 times 1 is 4, plus negative 4, 0. Multiplying times 1.6, add negative 8, we get negative 1.6. 4 times 21.8 plus negative 100 is negative 12.8. All right. Now we have our second column done. Now we hit the third column. So remember, we want 1, 1. All right, it's time to get our third 1. So do you remember how to get a 1? Look back at how we got a 1 here. Any number divided by itself is 1. So we're going to take row 3 and we're going to divide it by negative 1.6 because anything divided by itself is 1. So our new row 3, 0 divided by that is 0, 0, 1. And dividing negative 12.8 divided by negative 1.6 is 8. All right. Now, Charlotte, this is going to make you happy. We're going to stop right here, and we're going to find our solutions at this point. Now, I only have 2 minutes left in this video, so I'll do as much of it as I can. Remember that the first column represents small cups, S. The second column represents medium cups, and the third column was your large. Well, notice right here, we have 0 small plus 0 medium plus 1 large equals 8. Well, 0 times S is 0. 0 times medium is 0. So we have 1 large equals 8. So the number of large cups is 8. We found one of our answers. We have 8 large cups. Okay, let's go to the next one. We have 0 small plus 1 medium plus 1.6 large equals 21.8. So that's 0. 1 medium is just M plus, and then we're going to substitute the 8 in for L. And solving this, multiplying these together, and then subtracting from 21.8, we get medium equals 9. We have 9 medium. And then finally, on the last one, that's going to be for you. Write the equation for row 1. Substitute in the 9 and the 8 and solve for small. Okay, I'll see you in class tomorrow. Study, study, study.